The dust made Michael sneeze as he pulled another box from the attic of his childhood home. 3 weeks after his father's funeral, the house still felt heavy with memories. Every corner held echoes of the past, some warm, some painful, all of them suddenly his responsibility to sort through and decide what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. "Need any help up there?" His wife Diane called from downstairs. "I'm okay," Michael answered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The summer heat had turned the attic into an oven. "Just a few more boxes, then I'll take a break." At 42, Michael had thought he was prepared for his father's death. Richard Harrington had been sick for months, the cancer slowly taking him piece by piece. There had been time for goodbyes, for settling affairs, for making peace. But now, surrounded by the physical remnants of his father's life, Michael realized there was no real way to prepare for becoming an orphan, even as a middle-aged man with children of his own. His mother, Catherine, had died 15 years earlier, a sudden heart attack that had shattered their family when Michael was just 27. Now, with both parents gone, the family home would be sold, its contents divided between Michael and his older sister, Elizabeth. He picked up a photo album and flipped it open. His parents on their wedding day, young and smiling. His mother, in a garden holding a small Elizabeth on her hip. Family vacations at the lake, Christmas mornings. A lifetime captured in faded photographs. Michael set the album aside to keep and reached for the last box in the corner. It was smaller than the others, made of dark wood with brass fittings. He'd never seen it before. When he tried to open it, he found it locked. Curious, he carried it downstairs to his father's study, where he'd been sorting through paperwork all week. "What's that?" Diane asked, looking up from the pile of old tax returns she was organizing. "Not sure." "Found it in the attic. It's locked." "Your dad kept a spare key ring in his desk drawer," she suggested. "Middle one, I think." Michael rummaged through the drawer and found the small ring of keys his father had kept for various lockboxes and cabinets. The third key he tried fit perfectly. Inside the wooden box were several items: his father's military service medal, some old coins, a pocket watch, and underneath it all, a leather-bound book with a worn cover. When Michael opened it, he recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. "It's Mom's journal," he said softly, turning the pages with care. "I didn't know she kept one," Diane said, coming to look over his shoulder. "Neither did I." The journal entries started about a year before Catherine's death. Most were ordinary reflections on daily life, garden plans, notes about the children, recipes she wanted to try. Michael felt a pang of loss reading her thoughts, hearing her voice again in the written words. But as he continued turning pages, the tone of the entries began to change. About 2 months before her death, his mother's writing became more troubled. March 15th, felt dizzy again today after breakfast. 3rd time this week. Richard says it's just my blood pressure medication, but I've been taking it for years with no problems. March 18th, stomach pain again after dinner. Only happens when Richard cooks. Probably just a coincidence. Michael frowned, reading more carefully now. April 2nd, found an empty bottle of something in the garage trash. Label partly torn off, but had a skull and crossbones warning. When I asked Richard about it, he got angry and said it was for the garden pests. He's never gardened a day in his life. April 10th, hair coming out in clumps now. Doctor says it could be stress. Am I imagining things? Richard has been so attentive, lately bringing me tea every night. It doesn't taste right. Michael's hands began to shake as he turned to the final pages. April 23rd. I'm writing this at the library. I can't trust my home anymore. I've been saving samples of my hair and nails. The librarian helped me research the symptoms. I think I'm being poisoned. Slowly, carefully poisoned. I'm going to talk to Dr. Wells tomorrow without Richard knowing. The last entry was dated April 25th, just 2 days before her death. I found the proof today. I know it's Richard. The bank statements show he's taken out a life insurance policy on me. $500,000. He thinks I don't know. I've made copies of everything and hidden them where he won't find them. Tomorrow I'm going to confront him. If anything happens to me, it wasn't my heart. Michael stared at the page, unable to believe what he was reading. His mother had died on April 27, 2008. The official cause: heart attack. Michael? Diane's voice seemed to come from far away. What's wrong? You've gone white as a sheet. He handed her the journal without a word. As she read, her eyes widened. This can't be right, she whispered. Dad was with her when she died, Michael said, his voice hollow. They were alone at the house. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. But your father loved your mother. Everyone knew that. Michael stood up abruptly, knocking over a stack of papers. I need to call Elizabeth. His sister lived an hour away with her husband and teenage sons. As the elder sibling, she had always been the practical one, the steady one. She'd handle most of the arrangements after both parents' deaths, just as she'd taken charge of the family after their mother died. Michael, it's nearly midnight, Diane protested, but Michael was already dialing. Elizabeth answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. What's wrong? Are the kids okay? The kids are fine, Michael assured her. I found something at Dad's house, Mom's journal. You need to see it. Now? Can it wait until morning? No, Michael said firmly. It can't. 2 hours later, Elizabeth sat at Richard's kitchen table, the journal open before her. She'd read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. Mom was sick, she said finally. Remember? She was on all those medications. They made her confused sometimes. She doesn't sound confused, Michael argued. She sounds scared. And she was right about the life insurance policy. I found the paperwork yesterday. Elizabeth rubbed her temples. Lots of people have life insurance. That doesn't mean Dad killed her. What about the symptoms she described? The hair loss, the stomach problems, the dizziness. Side effects from her medications, probably. Then, why did Dad keep her journal locked up in the attic for 15 years? Why didn't he tell us about her suspicions? Elizabeth sighed. Because they would have hurt us, just like they're hurting you now. Look, I miss Mom too. I understand wanting someone to blame for losing her so suddenly, but accusing Dad of murder? He just died of cancer, Michael. We buried him 3 weeks ago. Michael paced the kitchen, unable to sit still. I know how it sounds, but what if she was right? What if Dad did something to her? Don't we deserve to know the truth? The truth is that Mom had a heart condition. The truth is that Dad was devastated when she died. I watched him cry every night for months. Or maybe he was crying from guilt, Michael suggested. Elizabeth slammed her hand on the table. Enough. I won't sit here and listen to you tarnish Dad's memory based on the paranoid writings of a sick woman. The siblings stared at each other across the table, the journal between them like a landmine. I'm going to find out what really happened, Michael said quietly. How? Mom's been gone for 15 years. I'm going to request her medical records, talk to her old friends, her doctor if he's still around. I need to know, Liz. Elizabeth gathered her purse and car keys. You do whatever you need to do to process your grief, Michael. But leave me out of it. And think about what this wild goose chase would do to your kids if people start hearing you accuse your father of murder. After she left, Michael sat alone at the kitchen table, the journal open to his mother's final entry. Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, Diane would bring their children to help continue clearing out the house. Life would go on, as it always did. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that his mother was trying to tell him something from beyond the grave. That she'd left this journal as evidence, as a plea for justice. Over the next few weeks, Michael became a detective in his mother's case. He requested her medical records, which showed she had indeed been prescribed several medications for high blood pressure and early arthritis. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but no autopsy had been performed. Your father declined. The autopsy, the hospital administrator explained over the phone. He said your mother wouldn't have wanted one. That detail bothered Michael deeply. His mother had been a nurse in her early career. She'd always been practical about medical matters, even donating her body to science in her will, a wish that had apparently been overlooked. He tracked down his mother's best friend Nancy, who still lived in town. "I always thought it was strange how suddenly she went," Nancy admitted when Michael visited her. "Catherine had been telling me she didn't feel well for weeks before it happened. She mentioned being worried about something, but she never said what. Did she ever mention being afraid of my father?" Nancy looked uncomfortable. "Not in so many words, but I did notice she stopped bringing him to our get-togethers those last few months. And once, when I dropped by unexpectedly, I found her crying. In the kitchen. She said it was nothing, but—" Nancy trailed off. "But what?" Michael pressed. She said, "We never really know people, do we, Nancy? Even those closest to us." I didn't think much of it at the time. As pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Michael became more convinced that his mother's suspicions had merit. But the most damning evidence came when he found a hidden compartment in his mother's old vanity, the one Elizabeth had taken to her house years ago. Inside was a small plastic bag containing strands of hair, fingernail clippings, and a note in his mother's handwriting. "Samples for testing. April 2008. That night, Michael made a decision that would change everything. If his mother had been poisoned, the evidence would still be in her body. There was only one way to know for sure. He would have to dig up his mother's grave. "You want to do what?" Diane's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with shock. The morning sun streamed through their kitchen window, making the moment seem too bright, too ordinary for the conversation they were having. "I need to know the truth," Michael said, his voice low so their children wouldn't hear from the next room. "If Mom was poisoned, the evidence would still be in her remains. Hair, nails, even bone tissue can show traces of certain poisons years later." Diane set her mug down carefully. "Michael, listen to yourself. You're talking about digging up your mother's grave based on a journal that's 15 years old. Have you thought this through?" "I've thought about nothing else for the past week," Michael admitted. "I know it sounds crazy, but what if she was murdered, Diane? Don't I have a responsibility to find out?" "What about your responsibility to the living?" Diane gestured toward the family room, where their 10-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son were watching Saturday morning cartoons. "What happens if this becomes public? Local architect accuses dead father of murdering mother, desecrates grave to prove it. Is that what you want your kids to deal with at school?" Michael flinched. He hadn't considered how this might affect his children. "I won't do anything illegal," he promised. "I'll go through proper channels." "And what are the proper channels for exhuming your mother's body 15 years after her death?" Diane asked, gentler now, seeing the pain in her husband's eyes. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out." Finding out proved harder than Michael expected. His first call to the county clerk's office led to a referral to the health department, which directed him to the medical examiner, who explained that exhumation requests typically needed to come from law enforcement as part of a criminal investigation. "But that's exactly what I'm trying to initiate," Michael explained, frustration mounting. "I have reason to believe my mother's death wasn't natural." "Do you have evidence to support that claim?" the medical examiner asked. "I have her journal, where she suspected she was being poisoned. I have hair and nail samples she saved before her death. I have documentation that my father took out a large life insurance policy on her just months before she died." "Did you take these concerns to the police?" Michael had. The local police had been polite, but dismissive, without an official cause to suspect foul play beyond a possibly paranoid journal. There wasn't enough to open an investigation, especially with both potential victim and suspect deceased. After hitting walls with official channels, Michael searched online for lawyers specializing in unusual cases. That's how he found Patricia Chen. Patricia's office was small but immaculate, decorated with potted succulents and framed law degrees. She listened without interrupting as Michael explained his situation, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. "This won't be easy," she said when he finished. "Exhumation requests are rarely granted without compelling evidence of a crime or a significant public health concern. So there's no chance?" Michael's heart sank. I didn't say that, Patricia corrected. I said it won't be easy. We'll need to build a case, gather more evidence than just the journal. Were there any witnesses to your mother's declining health? Before her death? Michael thought of Nancy, his mother's friend. Yes, and possibly her former nurse. Mom was seeing a home health nurse for her blood pressure. Good. We'll need statements from them. We should also try to locate the samples your mother collected. They could be crucial. Over the next few weeks, Michael worked with Patricia to build their case. They tracked down Brenda Wilson, the home health nurse who had visited Catherine regularly in her last months. I always found it strange, Brenda admitted, when they met at a local cafe. Your mother's symptoms didn't match her. Diagnosis: hair loss, digestive issues, chronic fatigue. These aren't typical for someone with controlled hypertension. Did you ever suspect poisoning? Patricia asked. Brenda hesitated. I had concerns, but it's a serious accusation. I suggested she get blood tests, which she did, but the results came back normal for the standard panels. I was planning to suggest more specialized testing when she died. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about your observations? Patricia asked. After all this time? I'm not sure what good it would do, Brenda said. But yes, I would. Michael also had the hair and nail samples tested at a private laboratory. The results came back showing elevated levels of thallium, a tasteless, odorless heavy metal that was once commonly used in rat poison. This is significant, Patricia said when the report came in. Thallium poisoning mimics many natural diseases, and its symptoms match what your mother described in her journal. Armed with this evidence, along with statements from Brenda and Nancy, and documentation of the life insurance policy, Patricia filed a formal petition for exhumation with the county court. Now we wait, she told Michael. The waiting was unbearable. Elizabeth, furious when she learned what Michael was doing, stopped speaking to him entirely. You need help, she'd said during their last phone call. Professional help, not a lawyer. Even Diane, who had been supportive if skeptical, began to worry about her husband's growing obsession. You're not sleeping, she pointed out one night, finding him at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., reviewing his mother's journal again. You barely eat. The kids miss you. Whatever the truth is about your mom, she wouldn't want this for you. Michael knew she was right, but he couldn't let it go. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined his mother alone and afraid, realizing her husband was slowly killing her. 3 months after filing the petition, the court date finally arrived. Michael sat beside Patricia in the small courtroom, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. To his surprise, Elizabeth was there too, sitting in the back row with her husband. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, reviewed their petition carefully. Ms. Chen, while your client has certainly presented concerning evidence, I'm troubled by the 15-year delay in raising these issues. Why now, after all this time? Your Honor, my client only discovered his mother's journal and the evidence of possible poisoning after his father's recent death. He's acted promptly since making these discoveries. The judge turned to Michael. Mr. Harrington, do you understand that exhumation is an extraordinary measure? That it disturbs the sanctity of burial and can cause significant distress to family members? I do, Your Honor, Michael replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. But I believe my mother was murdered. She deserves justice, even after all this time. Your sister objects to the exhumation, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. The judge sighed, removing her glasses. I've reviewed the evidence presented, including the laboratory results showing thallium in the hair and nail samples. While concerning, there's no chain of custody proving these samples actually came from Catherine Harrington. They could have been contaminated or misidentified over the years. Michael's heart sank as he realized where this was heading. Furthermore, even if poisoning occurred, the primary suspect, Richard Harrington, is deceased and beyond the reach of our justice system. The court must balance the potential for justice against the certainty of disturbing a burial site and causing additional trauma to surviving family members. The judge replaced her glasses. Petition for exhumation denied. The words hit Michael like physical blows. Patricia placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We can appeal," she whispered. But Michael knew an appeal would take months, perhaps years, with no guarantee of success. Outside the courtroom, he stood in a daze, barely registering the people passing by. Elizabeth approached, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "It's over, Michael. Please let Mom rest in peace." "How can she rest in peace if she was murdered?" Michael asked bitterly. "She's been gone 15 years. Dad's gone too. What justice are you hoping for?" "The truth," Michael said simply. "I just want the truth." Elizabeth shook her head sadly. "Sometimes the truth just causes more pain." She touched his shoulder briefly. "I hope you can find a way to move forward now." Then she walked away, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. That night, after Diane and the children had gone to bed, Michael sat at his desk, staring at his mother's journal and the small bag of samples that might have proven she was poisoned. The legal system had failed him, failed his mother. But he couldn't let it go. The thought of her lying in her grave, her murderer never brought to justice, was unbearable. His phone rang, startling him. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Michael? It's Owen Miller. We met at your dad's funeral. I worked with him at the plant years ago." Michael vaguely remembered a stocky, gray-haired man who had approached him at the reception. "Yes, I remember. Look, I heard about what happened in court today. Small town news travels fast." Owen paused. "I didn't just know your dad from work. I've been the groundskeeper at Riverside Cemetery for the past 20 years. Michael sat up straighter. Riverside Cemetery was where his mother was buried. "I'm not saying I agree with what you're trying to do," Owen continued. "But if you're determined to find answers, well, I might be able to help." "How?" Michael asked, hardly daring to hope. "Meet me tomorrow night at the maintenance shed behind the cemetery. 10 o'clock, come alone." The line went dead before Michael could ask any more questions. He stared at his phone, heart racing. Was this the break he'd been waiting for? Or was he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? Either way, he knew he would be at the cemetery tomorrow night. Some questions demanded answers no matter the cost. The digital clock on Michael's dashboard flipped to 9:58 p.m. as he killed the engine. He'd parked his car a block away from the cemetery entrance, not wanting to draw attention. Rain pattered softly on the roof, matching the nervous rhythm of his heartbeat. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, grabbing his raincoat from the passenger seat. Completely insane. He'd told Diane he was meeting Patricia to discuss appealing the court decision. The lie sat heavy in his stomach. In 12 years of marriage, they'd never kept secrets from each other, until now. The walk to the cemetery felt longer than it was. Streetlights cast elongated shadows across the wet pavement, and the occasional passing car made Michael duck his head instinctively. What he was considering wasn't just against the law, it was against everything he'd been raised to respect about death and burial. The maintenance shed stood at the far edge of the cemetery, a squat building partially hidden by overgrown bushes. As Michael approached, he saw a faint light glowing from inside. He hesitated, then knocked softly on the wooden door. It opened immediately, as if Owen had been waiting right behind it. The older man's face was half in shadow, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You came," Owen said, stepping back to let Michael enter. "Wasn't sure you would." Inside, the shed smelled of earth and machine oil. Tools hung from pegs on the walls, and a small desk in the corner held a single lamp that provided the only illumination. Rain drummed steadily on the metal roof. "Why did you call me?" Michael asked, removing his wet raincoat. Owen gestured for Michael to sit on an overturned bucket while he took the only chair. "I've been watching you fight for this exhumation. Reminds me of something that happened years back with another family. Different circumstances, but same determination. You've helped someone exhume a body before?" Owen rubbed his weathered hands together. "Not exactly, but I know this cemetery better than anyone, every plot, every pathway. I've been here 22 years now." "Were you working here when my mother was buried?" "I was. I remember that day. Rained then, too." Owen's eyes grew distant with memory. Your father was destroyed. Never seen a man so broken up at a funeral. He kept saying he should have been there when it happened, might have saved her. Michael felt a flicker of doubt. Could he have been wrong about his father? But then he remembered the journal, the hair samples, the insurance policy. The evidence was too strong. If my father killed her, he was putting on a good show, Michael said flatly. Owen shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe grief and guilt looked the same from the outside. He leaned forward. Either way, I'm not here to judge what your father did or didn't do. I'm here because I believe people deserve to know the truth about their loved ones. And you're willing to help me find that truth, even though the court said no? The court doesn't know what I know, Owen said cryptically. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded paper. Cemetery layout. Your mother's plot is here. He pointed to a spot marked in pencil. Section E, row 12, plot 33. Michael studied the map, his pulse quickening. Why are you helping me? Owen was quiet for a long moment. I had a sister once. She died under suspicious circumstances. Husband said it was an accident, but I never believed him. Couldn't prove anything. Never got closure. He met Michael's gaze directly. Sometimes the legal system fails the dead. What exactly are you suggesting? Michael asked, though he already knew. I can give you access to the cemetery after hours. Show you where the maintenance equipment is kept. What you do with that information is your business. Owen stood up. But know this. If you're caught, I'll deny everything. I'm too close to retirement to risk my pension. I understand. Michael nodded. When? Tomorrow night. Midnight. The security camera on the east gate has been broken for months. Budget cuts mean it won't be fixed anytime soon. Owen handed Michael a key. This opens the equipment shed behind this building. Return it when you're done. As Michael walked back to his car, the rain falling harder now, he felt as if he'd crossed a line. Until this moment, his search for truth had stayed within legal boundaries. Now he was planning something that could land him in jail. But what choice did he have? His mother deserved justice, or at least truth. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Michael researched exhumation procedures online, horrified yet determined. He bought supplies, work gloves, shovels, tarps, at a hardware store one town over, paying cash. He told Diane he needed to work late, adding another lie to the growing play. By 11:30 p.m. he was parked near the cemetery again, this time with a backpack of supplies and a churning stomach. The rain had stopped, but the ground would be soft and muddy. Easier to dig, he thought with grim practicality. Owen was waiting by the east gate as promised. Security guard makes rounds at 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., he whispered. You'll have about 2.5 hours after he passes. The equipment shed has everything else you'll need. Michael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. God help you find what you're looking for, Owen said, then slipped away into the darkness. The cemetery at night was a different world. Moonlight cast blue-white light across the headstones, creating strange shadows that seemed to move when Michael wasn't looking directly at them. He followed the map to Section E, counting rows silently until he reached his mother's grave. The headstone was simple, just as she would have wanted. Catherine Ann Harrington, beloved wife and mother, 1963-2008. Michael stood for a moment, overcome with the enormity of what he was about to do. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, but I need to know. The equipment shed yielded the larger tools he needed, a pickaxe, shovels, and a hand-cranked winch system used for lowering new caskets. Michael worked methodically, first removing the layer of sod and setting it aside on a tarp. Then he began to dig. The work was harder than he'd imagined. Though the rain had softened the top layer of soil, the earth grew more compacted as he dug deeper. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool night air. Blisters formed and burst on his hands, but he barely noticed the pain. An hour passed, then 2. The hole grew deeper. Michael's muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. He had to reach the coffin before the security guard made his 4 a.m. rounds. Just when he feared he might not be deep enough, his shovel struck something solid with a dull thud. The sound sent a shiver up his spine. This was it. His mother's coffin, using the edge of the shovel. Michael carefully cleared away the remaining soil from the top of the casket. It was harder to see now. Clouds had moved in, blocking the moonlight. He switched on his headlamp, keeping the beam low to avoid detection. The coffin was a simple wooden one, now weathered from years underground. His hands trembled as he used a crowbar from his backpack to pry at the sealed lid. The wood creaked and groaned, resisting after 15 years. For a moment, Michael hesitated. What would he find? A skeleton with traces of poison, or just the natural remains of his mother, proving that his suspicions had led him to commit this terrible act for nothing? Too late to turn back now. With a final heave, the coffin lid cracked open. Michael steeled himself and shone his light, inside prepared for the grim sight of his mother's remains. But what the light revealed stopped his heart. The coffin was filled with sandbags, arranged roughly in the shape of a human body. What the? Michael gasped, frantically widening the opening to see better. There was no mistake, no body, just sandbags, some old newspapers, and a bundle of clothing. His mind reeled, unable to process what he was seeing. Where was his mother? Had her body been moved? Stolen? Had she never been buried here at all? With shaking hands, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. My name is Michael Harrington, he said, his voice barely steady. I'm at Riverside Cemetery. I've opened my mother's grave and she's not here. Sir, did you say you opened a grave? Yes, my mother's grave. Catherine Harrington, buried 15 years ago. But she's not here. The coffin is filled with sandbags. Michael's voice cracked. I need the police. Something is very wrong. Stay where you are, sir. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Michael ended the call and sat on the edge of the grave, his mind spinning with possibilities. If his mother wasn't buried here, where was she? And who had put sandbags in her coffin? A horrible thought struck him. What if his mother hadn't died at all? What if her death had been staged? But why? And how? Hundreds of people had attended her funeral. There had been a body, a closed casket, yes, but still. In the distance he heard sirens approaching. Soon, flashlights would sweep the cemetery, and he would have to explain why he dug up a grave without permission. He might be arrested, charged with desecration, maybe even imprisoned. But none of that mattered now. Whatever trouble he was in, it was nothing compared to the mystery he'd uncovered. His mother's body was missing, and somehow he knew this was just the beginning of an even darker truth than he had imagined. The sirens grew louder. Michael stood up, covered in mud and sweat, and waited for the police to arrive. Behind him, the open coffin with its cargo of sandbags lay exposed to the night air for the first time in 15 years. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The police station's interview room was cold and stark. Michael sat alone at a metal table, still wearing his mud-stained clothes. They'd let him wash his hands, but nothing else. Dried dirt flaked from his jeans onto the floor as he shifted in the uncomfortable chair. 3 hours had passed since the officers had found him standing beside the open grave. Their flashlight beams had caught him like an animal in headlights, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, looking every bit the grave robber he technically was. The door opened, and Detective Laura Benson entered, carrying a folder and 2 coffee cups. She placed one in front of Michael without a word. She was in her 40s with short brown hair, and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much of humanity's darker side. Mr. Harrington, she said, sitting across from him. You've put us in quite a situation. I know, Michael replied, wrapping his cold hands around the warm cup. Am I under arrest? That depends. Right now we're trying to understand exactly what happened. Digging up a grave without authorization is a serious offense. More serious than a missing body? Michael countered. Detective Benson studied him for a moment. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me why you dug up your mother's grave. Michael took a deep breath and explained everything. Finding his mother's journal, the hair samples with traces of thallium, the court's refusal to grant an exhumation order, and finally his desperate decision to take matters into his own hands. I thought I would find evidence that my father poisoned my mother, he concluded. Instead, I found sandbags. I don't understand what's happening, Detective. She opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed the opened coffin, just as Michael had left it. Our crime scene unit confirmed what you found. This coffin contains approximately 120 pounds of sand in canvas bags, some clothing, and bundled newspapers from April 2008, the month your mother supposedly died. Supposedly? Michael caught the word immediately. Detective Benson's expression gave nothing away. We're investigating all possibilities, including the possibility that my mother isn't dead. The question hung in the air between them. Mr. Harrington, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before answering. To your knowledge, did anyone actually see your mother's body after her death was reported? Michael thought back to those horrible days after his mother's death. No. It was a closed casket. Dad said she wouldn't have wanted people's last memory of her to be like that. And who identified her body officially? My father, I assume. I was 27, but I was away at a conference when it happened. By the time I got back, she was already at the funeral home. The casket was sealed. And your sister? She arrived a day before me. But I don't think she saw Mom either. The detective made a note. We'll need to speak with her. Detective, Michael leaned forward. Are you saying my mother might still be alive? I'm not saying anything yet. But the fact that someone went to considerable trouble to fake a burial raises questions we need to answer. The door opened again, and an officer leaned in. Detective, there's someone here you'll want to talk to. Elizabeth Harrington Peters, the victim's daughter. Michael's heart sank. Elizabeth would be furious with him. Detective Benson stood. I'll speak with her. In the meantime, Officer Clark will take your official statement. She paused at the door. Mr. Harrington, while what you did was illegal, your call to 911 shows you weren't trying to hide your actions. That counts for something. After giving his statement, Michael was moved to a small waiting area. His phone had been taken, so he couldn't call Diane. She must be worried sick by now. Nearly an hour passed before Elizabeth stormed in, her face a mask of cold fury. They're not pressing charges, she said without preamble. Something about extenuating circumstances given what you found. You're free to go. Michael stood, relief washing over him. Liz, don't. She cut him off. Detective Benson is waiting to speak with both of us. She says it's important. They followed an officer to a different room, this one less austere than the interview room. Detective Benson was already there, along with a man Michael didn't recognize. Tall, with silver hair and a serious expression. Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Peters, this is Detective Morgan from Financial Crimes. Benson introduced them. Please sit down. Once they were seated, Detective Benson opened a laptop. In light of what we found tonight, we ran some preliminary searches on your mother's identity. What I'm about to show you may be disturbing. She turned the laptop so they could see the screen, which showed a bank surveillance photo. It was grainy but clear enough to see a woman at an ATM. Though older than Michael remembered, with gray hair instead of brown, the face was unmistakable. That's Mom, Elizabeth whispered, the color draining from her face. This image was captured 3 years ago at a bank in Bogota, Colombia, Detective Morgan explained. The woman in the photo used a debit card issued to someone named Maria Rosales. The account was funded by wire transfers from a Cayman Islands account, which in turn received regular payments from several shell companies. I don't understand, Michael said, though a horrible suspicion was forming in his mind. Are you saying my mother faked her death? That she's been alive all this time? We believe so, Detective Benson nodded. And not just her. We have reason to think your father was involved in the deception. Elizabeth shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. Dad was devastated when Mom died. He was never the same. Mrs. Peters, what if your father's grief was an act? Detective Morgan asked gently. A necessary performance to avoid suspicion? But why? Michael asked, struggling to make sense of it all. Why would they do this to us? Detective Morgan took over. We've been looking into your father's business dealings around the time of your mother's death. Richard Harrington was the financial controller for Tri-State Manufacturing from 1998 to 2008. In the months before your mother's supposed heart attack, the company's auditors began noticing discrepancies in the accounts. He slid several documents across the table: financial reports, bank statements, audit notices. We believe your father was embezzling funds through a sophisticated invoice scheme. By the time questions were being raised, he'd diverted over $2 million to offshore accounts. Dad? A thief? Elizabeth looked physically ill. I don't believe it. The evidence suggests that when the scheme was about to be discovered, your parents decided to vanish together, Detective Morgan continued. But rather than both disappearing, which would have immediately triggered suspicion, they staged your mother's death instead. Your father stayed behind, playing the role of grieving widower while gradually transferring funds to wherever your mother was setting up their new life. Michael felt dizzy. The parents he thought he knew, the kind nurse who volunteered at the children's hospital, the hard-working father who never missed a school event, had been living a lie. And they had lied to their children in the cruelest possible way, letting them grieve a death that never happened. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then Dad's recent death. We're looking into that as well, Detective Benson said. The timing is suspicious. A terminal cancer diagnosis would provide the perfect cover for him to finally join your mother without raising alarms. His body was cremated, Elizabeth said faintly. His specific request. Of course it was, Michael said bitterly, because there was no body to cremate. He's probably alive too, isn't he? The detectives exchanged glances. We're investigating that possibility, Detective Morgan admitted. The death certificate was signed by a doctor who's since retired and moved abroad. We haven't been able to reach him yet. Elizabeth stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need air, she gasped and rushed from the room. Michael sat in stunned silence for a moment, then asked, What happens now? We're working with international authorities to track the money trail, Detective Morgan explained. Bank records show regular withdrawals from accounts in Colombia, Ecuador, and most recently Costa Rica. If your parents are alive, we'll find them. And then what? Arrest them? Financial fraud of this magnitude is a serious crime. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. Michael nodded numbly. Part of him wanted his parents found and punished for their deception. Another part, the part that remembered bedtime stories and family vacations, Christmas mornings and graduation celebrations, hoped they were somewhere warm and safe, even if it meant they'd never face justice. He found Elizabeth outside, sitting on a bench, her face in her hands. He sat beside her, not speaking. What was there to say? Their entire childhood, their understanding of their family had been built on lies. I kept seeing Dad by Mom's grave, Elizabeth finally said, her voice hollow. Every anniversary, every birthday, he'd bring her favorite flowers. He'd stand there for hours sometimes. Was it all an act? 15 years of pretending? I don't know, Michael admitted. Maybe some part of him really did miss her. Maybe he regretted what they'd done to us. Or maybe he was laughing at us for believing the whole thing. Elizabeth's voice hardened. I defended him to you. I called you crazy for suspecting him. You couldn't have known. Neither could you. But you sensed something was wrong. That journal. Do you think Mom planted it? Knowing Dad would keep it? Knowing someday we might find it? Michael hadn't considered that. Maybe it was her way of reaching out, of letting us know she was alive. After enough time had passed, they sat in silence as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the police station, detectives were making calls, sending emails, setting in motion the machinery that might eventually track down their parents, if they were still alive, if they could be found. "What do we tell our kids?" Elizabeth asked finally. "How do we explain that their grandparents might not be dead after all?" Michael had no answer. The truth seemed too bizarre, too painful to share. Yet more lies would only continue the cycle of deception. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever we decide, we'll do it together." As they sat watching the sunrise, Michael felt something shift inside him. The mystery of his mother's journal had been solved, but a larger mystery had taken its place. Somewhere in the world, his parents or their ghosts were out there, and someday he might have to face them and ask the question that now burned in his heart. Why? 6 months passed like a strange dream. Fall turned to winter, then to spring, and Michael's life settled into a new rhythm, one punctuated by weekly updates from Detective Benson and meetings with the FBI agents who had joined the investigation. Once its international scope became clear, the case had grown far beyond a missing body in a grave. It now involved multiple jurisdictions, financial crimes across borders, and the search for 2 people who had become very good at disappearing. Michael stood at his kitchen window, watching his children play in the backyard. 12-year-old Ben was teaching his 10-year-old sister Lily how to throw a proper spiral with a football. Their laughter drifted through the glass, a reminder that despite everything, life went on. "Any word today?" Diane asked, coming to stand beside him. She'd been his rock through all of this, handling the media attention when the story broke, shielding the children from the worst of it, and never once saying, "I told you so," about his grave-digging misadventure. "Nothing new," Michael replied. The Costa Rica lead went cold. They found the apartment, but the tenants had moved out 3 weeks earlier, left everything behind. Diane squeezed his hand. "They can't run forever." "Can't they? They've managed 15 years so far." He tried to keep the bitterness from his voice, but it crept in anyway. The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Elizabeth stood on the porch holding a cardboard box. "They're releasing Dad's things," she said as Michael let her in. "The stuff they took from his house as evidence. I thought we should go through it together." They spread the items across the dining room table, Richard Harrington's laptop, financial records, personal papers, and several old phones. "Most of the important evidence they're keeping," Elizabeth explained. "But they've made copies of everything. These are just personal effects they don't need anymore." Michael picked up one of the phones. "Have they gone through these?" "They said they did, but most were password protected. The tech guys couldn't crack them all. They were more focused on the computer and financial records." For the next hour, the siblings sorted through their father's belongings. Most items held little significance: old receipts, instruction manuals, business cards from people neither of them recognized. "Look at this," Elizabeth said suddenly, holding up a small, worn leather address book. "Remember when Dad used to write down every phone number in this thing? Mom used to tease him about being old-fashioned." Michael smiled at the memory. He never trusted digital contacts. Said they could disappear with one computer crash. Elizabeth flipped through the yellowed pages, pausing occasionally to read a name aloud. Dr. Wilson, Uncle Pete, Mrs. Knowles from next door. She stopped suddenly, her finger on a page. "Mike, look at this." In the M section, there was an entry that simply read, "Maria, emergency only," followed by a phone number with an international country code. Michael's heart raced. Maria. Mom's fake name was Maria Rosales. "Should we call it?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael hesitated. "The police have probably already tried it. But what if they missed it? It's just labeled Maria, not Catherine or Mom. What if they didn't make the connection?" Michael stared at the number. After months of dead ends and frustration, here was something tangible, a potential direct line to his mother. "If we call, we should tell Detective Benson," he said. "We will," Elizabeth agreed. "But after. Please, Mike. I need to know." Michael took out his phone, then stopped. "If we use our regular phones, they could see the number on caller ID. They might hang up." Elizabeth thought for a moment. Dad's old phones. Let's try one of those. They found a phone that still had some battery life, an older model flip phone. Their father's burner phone, the detectives had called it. Michael carefully dialed the international number, his hand trembling slightly. He put the phone on speaker and placed it on the table between them. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Michael was about to give up when there was a click. "Hola?" a woman's voice answered cautiously. Michael and Elizabeth froze, staring at each other. Even after 15 years, there was no mistaking that voice. "Mom?" Michael said, his voice cracking. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Michael?" The woman's voice shifted from Spanish to English instantly. "Is that you?" "Yes, it's me. Elizabeth is here too." Another pause. "How did you find this number?" "Dad's address book, the one you gave him for his birthday the year before. You came before you faked your death." The bitterness in his voice must have carried across the connection because Catherine sighed deeply. "You know then?" "We know everything," Elizabeth said, leaning toward the phone. "The empty grave, the money, all of it." "Are you with the police now?" Catherine asked, her voice guarded. "No," Michael answered. "But they're looking for you. FBI, Interpol, everyone." "Richard said they might be. That's why we had to move again." She paused. "Your father. He wanted to contact you to explain, but I said it was too dangerous." "Dad's alive too." Elizabeth's voice shook with emotion. "We buried an empty coffin for him as well?" "Yes. He's alive. His cancer story. That was just so he could disappear without suspicion. Join me permanently after all these years." Michael's mind reeled. Even though they'd suspected this, hearing it confirmed was still a shock. "Where are you?" "I can't tell you that, Michael. You know I can't." "Why?" The word burst from him, loaded with 15 years of grief and 6 months of betrayal. "Why did you do this to us? Do you have any idea what it was like, thinking you were dead? Grieving you? Visiting your empty grave for 15 years? There was a long silence. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. When the company started investigating the missing funds, your father panicked. We needed time to hide the money, to set up new identities. We thought maybe a year, 2 at most. Then we'd find a way to resurrect me. Say there was a mistake or I had amnesia, something. But you never came back," Elizabeth said flatly. "By then it was too complicated. The money was traced to offshore accounts. If I suddenly appeared alive, there would be questions, investigations. Your father would go to prison. And then," she sighed, "then years passed and it seemed kinder to let you believe I was dead than to reappear and confess our lies." "Kinder?" Michael couldn't keep the anger from his voice. "You think abandoning your children was kind?" "You weren't children anymore," Catherine said defensively. "You were adults with your own lives. Elizabeth was married, you were engaged to Diane. You didn't need us the way you once did." "We still needed our mother," Elizabeth whispered. "I needed you when my first son was born, when my marriage fell apart and came back together. Every day, Mom. We needed you every day." The phone went silent again, save for the sound of Catherine crying softly. "Are the police listening to this call?" she finally asked. "No," Michael assured her. "But we're going to tell them about it. I understand." She took a deep breath. "Your father wants to talk to you. Can I put him on?" Without waiting for an answer, there was a rustling sound, and then a familiar voice came through the speaker. "Michael? Elizabeth?" Despite everything, Michael's eyes filled with tears at the sound of his father's voice. "Dad," he managed. "I know you must hate us right now," Richard said, his voice weary. "You have every right to. What we did was unforgivable." "Then why did you do it?" Elizabeth demanded. "Was money really worth destroying our family?" "It wasn't just about the money," Richard replied. "At least not at first. I made a mistake. borrowed from company accounts to invest in what I thought was a sure thing. When it failed, I took more to try to fix it to pay it back before anyone noticed. It snowballed from there. So you stole, Michael said bluntly. Yes, I stole. And when I was about to be caught, I convinced your mother to help me escape the consequences. He sounded tired, defeated. The fake death was my idea. Catherine wanted to just run away together, but I knew that would raise immediate suspicions. This way I could transfer money gradually while playing the grieving widower. The journal, Michael said suddenly. Mom's journal with the poisoning. Suspicions. Did you plant that for me to find? Richard laughed softly without humor. So you found that? I wondered if you might. Yes, I left it where I thought you'd eventually discover it. After my death, I wanted you to know the truth, or at least part of it. Why not just tell us directly? Elizabeth asked. Cowardice, Richard admitted simply. I couldn't face you with the truth, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes. The siblings sat in stunned silence, trying to process their father's confession. Where are you now? Michael finally asked. Somewhere safe, Catherine answered, apparently having taken the phone back. Somewhere we can't be extradited. We don't live lavishly, if that matters. Most of the money is gone, legal fees, bribes, moving constantly. Do you ever regret it? Elizabeth asked. Do you ever wish you just faced the consequences instead of running? There was a long pause. Every day, Catherine whispered. Every single day. The call ended soon after, with awkward goodbyes and no promises of future contact. Michael and Elizabeth sat at the table for a long time afterward, the old flip phone between them like a bomb that had detonated and left them shell-shocked. We need to call Detective Benson, Michael finally said. Elizabeth nodded. I know. But neither moved to make the call just yet. They needed this moment, this small space of time to absorb the reality that both their parents were alive, living under false names in some unnamed country, carrying the weight of their deception. What do we tell the kids? Elizabeth asked, echoing her question from months ago. Michael looked out the window where Ben and Lily were still playing, blissfully unaware that their world had shifted once again. The truth, he said finally. As much of it as they can understand. They deserve better than lies. Elizabeth reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll never see them again, will we? Probably not, Michael admitted. Not unless they choose to turn themselves in. And would we want to see them after what they did? Michael had no answer for that. The parents he had loved and the people who had betrayed them seemed like different people entirely. How could he reconcile the mother who had bandaged his scraped knees with the woman who had let him believe she was dead for 15 years? The father who had taught him to fish with the man who had stolen millions and faked his own death? As he reached for his phone to call Detective Benson, Michael realized that some questions had no satisfying answers. His parents had made their choices, and now he and Elizabeth would make theirs, to move forward with truth, however painful it might be. The empty graves would remain empty, but perhaps now they could begin to fill the empty spaces in their hearts with something more solid than lies, understanding, acceptance, and eventually perhaps even forgiveness, not for their parents' sake but for their own.